think of what Gandhi did. Think of what Martin Luther King did. Think of what Nelson Mandela did in very harsh conditions. And maybe it's going to be my son. Maybe it's going to be your son. Maybe it's going to be, I mean, this younger generation, there's some really incredibly beautiful people. And it just takes one being to change the course of history.
Hey everyone, it's Raghu, and I'm back with Dale Borglum, RamDev as I know him, and welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be with you again, Raghu, my dear brother friend.
Yeah. As many of you might know, Dale RamDev has a podcast on the Be Here Now network, superb podcast, and Dale also has worked with, this is a little bit of a recap because I haven't done anything with you in a long time, RamDev. Just the kind of work that RamDev has been doing around death and dying since the very early days in the 70s with Ram Dass and Stephen Levine, and has carried the torch as people have left their bodies.
That's quite an image.
Yeah.
I believe at one point you called me the OG of this field.
Yeah. You're one of the OGs, right? And you're getting more OG as time goes on.
Right.
But yet, just so this is a Living Dying Project?
Living Dying Project, www.livingdying.org. A lot of good stuff there.
Yeah. I highly recommend this, and we'll get at some of what is behind the project in a bit. But I just wanted to, well, first of all, first thing that comes to mind. So RamDev and I were with Ram Dass back in the day when he went back to India, second time to see Neem Karoli Baba, who we call Maharaj-ji, as you all know. And we were there together at that time. And you just have marvelous, I like to hear your stories. Can we just to get ourselves placed? First of all, RamDev as Dale has a PhD in mathematics from Stanford University. Just think of that, folks. Right? Am I right about that?
Almost. I mean, it's actually mathematical statistics, but it was Stanford. And I got two things out of that PhD. One thing is I got a lot of compassion for
How
scientists.
Did you get compassion? Okay.
Because I suffered a lot in getting my PhD. I was halfway through it and I started taking acid and I said, what am I doing here? This is insanity, but I'm almost done. I should complete this thing. But the other thing is that I've been trained to see patterns in things. And I really have understood how the awakening of the chakras, the yanas of Buddhism, stages of early childhood development, on and on. All the really true healing paths are saying the same thing with some very common threads that when we cut back from the cultural language and distinctions, there's this path that's really accessible to everybody. And in seeing that, it's also easy to kind of see where you are, where you're stuck, what you might want to do next. And my experience is that a lot of people in the West aren't very embodied. That a lot of all this Eastern stuff that we talk about, all the Hindu and Buddhist contemplative practices were developed by and for these Asian people a long, long time ago who were running around barefoot. They didn't have an iPhone. They didn't have an iPhone charger even. And so, and they were sleeping in the bed with their parents. And so consequently, they were grounded and they were centered. They inhabited the lower chakras pretty fully. They had a whole other set of problems. I'm not saying they were better off necessarily, but the trying to disidentify with who you think you are and identify with your deeper self from a standpoint of not being grounded and centered gets really messy really quickly. And I was talking to Mirabai Starr a while back, who used to be young. We all did, I think. and when she was young, she was at a retreat at Lama with Ram Dass. And in fact, she was so kind of surprised by what he said that she even went back and checked the recording. And he said, okay, on this retreat, we're going to start working with the heart because the first 3 chakras are just too dangerous. We're going to avoid all that sex and power stuff. It's like, forget about that. And it's an opinion that he greatly changed later on, of course. But I think that is a way a lot of people approach spirituality. That I want to open my heart, I want to dissolve, I want to let go, I want to connect with God. And I don't know how many thousands of people have come to me for dying and grief support. And I can count on the fingers of one hand, probably, the number who haven't had major issues of fear, guilt, and shame, the first 3 chakras, that are right in front of them when they're saying, let's go to God. Right? And it's not that it's different that God and this other, the kind of lower quote unquote energies. But that stuff also often gets avoided and demeaned. It's like, let's get to the good stuff.
Yeah. Yes, that is so prevalent in our quote unquote spiritual culture. It is absolutely that. So, but what I just found interesting was that you were able to recognize patterns. You just said you spoke to the fact that there really all of these paths, they come together at the top of the mountain, and recognizing these patterns. I thought you were going to say that something related to your experience of whatever that thing there. That's what I call God, divine, that thing there from my days in Montreal where my French friends couldn't describe something because I didn't speak English well enough. And they go, you know what I mean? That thing there. So that thing there was Neem Karoli Baba, which we couldn't describe. So that's a good description. But yeah, seeing these, I thought you were going to relate something about being able to identify patterns through this doctorate at Stanford and related to meeting Neem Karoli Baba. No?
No.
There was nothing. Well, you know what? I'm okay. I'm speaking to Ram Dass saying, if I hadn't had the experiences that I had with psychedelics, I would not have been able to grok Neem Karoli Baba in the same way. He said, that was something that opened up a window for me to be able to grok something of what that being was. So I thought maybe you were doing the same thing with the patterns that you got from Stanford.
Well, these patterns aren't really anything I really understood until I got back home and I lost all my money and I started teaching and I said, hey, what's going on here? But I don't know if psychedelics show you the pattern so much as that it rips you open. It shows you there's another dimension of reality. I mean, I certainly took a lot of psychedelics before I got to India too. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's kind of hard to know what it would have been like to be with Maharaj-ji, not having taken psychedelics, but like, I don't think Mr. Tiwari ever took psychedelics. I don't think maybe he did, but yeah. I mean, like KK and these people, they didn't need psychedelics to grok who Maharaj-ji was, right? I mean.
But they weren't idiots from the West, from America, okay?
Speak for yourself, my brother. Okay. Okay. So, But
wait, I'm sorry. I mean, that's all joking aside, kind of. But there is a reality that these people that you mentioned, by the way, everybody, they were major mentors of ours, while we were there with Maharaj-ji. But I mean, they grew up with this in their culture. They were attuned. I don't know how attuned we were. I think we got attuned partially because of psychedelics, no?
Well, I remember I was over at Balaram's house. It was not many people know Balaram, maybe, but he was close to Maharaj-ji. He was there.
Took all the great pictures that you said, not all, but many of
a lot
the
of
really,
pictures.
Yeah,
and he said he was with Maharaj-ji once, and there were some Indian people there, and Maharaj-ji turned to the Indian people and pointed at Balaram and said, "He has been my devotee for so many lifetimes." Right. And, maybe I was a naive Westerner, but, I spent time with Muktananda. I just about killed myself trying to surrender to that dude.
I met you when you were almost dead there.
I weighed 113 pounds. I had blood coming out of my feet and my asshole, among other places. I was so sick.
TMI on that.
So, what's that?
I said TMI on that one.
Oh, too much information.
Yeah.
But as soon as I met Maharaj-ji, it happened in an instant. It wasn't about seeing patterns. It wasn't about understanding something. There was he presented himself to me, and I think to everybody who was there, in the way that they needed to be met, in the way they needed to be received. And so it didn't seem to have anything to do with how clever I was or my PhD at Stanford. I mean, in a way, that was getting in the way, me trying to figure out what's going on here. I mean, I had one of my Maharaj-ji stories, maybe you know it, maybe you don't, my Price of Milk in America story. Do you know that story?
It's in the book. Love everyone. Get that book. You'll get Ram Dass's story and everybody else. Okay.
But anyway, I was with Maharaj-ji, and he, right in the very beginning, and he was going on and on and on about the price of milk in America. And I'm getting kind of bored. I'm thinking, wait a minute, I came here to get enlightened, not talk about the price of milk.
Yeah.
And he was going on and on and on. And I said, well, maybe he's not who Ram Dass thinks he is, or what's going on here? I mean, I feel this connection, but why is he talking about that? And boom, there's this explosion in me that it was him talking to me inwardly. I don't know how I can describe that, but that's what happened. And he was saying, look, we can talk about interesting stuff and we can be clever, but that just makes the mind busy. Let's talk about this trivial stuff. And there's an ocean of bliss that's always available. And I fell into this ocean of bliss and I could barely talk for the rest of the day. Right? So I don't know. I don't think that had anything to do with me being a mathematician or seeing patterns or anything. Right? In fact, it was kind of the opposite, that I needed to be more simple. Like another time, I got the prime position at his foot dangling off of the tucket, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm rubbing his foot and I'm saying the mantra that he gave me. And I'm kind of in this semi-blissful state, being really happy. And then I start thinking, how lucky am I? Look at what a great devotee I am. And he started pulling his foot away. As soon as I had that thought. So I went back to saying the mantra and he relaxed his foot and I rubbed it for a few more minutes. And then again, the thought came, I'm doing this. And he started, as soon as I had the thought, he started pulling his foot away. It happened 3 different times, right? As soon as there was me, RamDev, Dale, mathematician, I know what I'm doing. He didn't want me touching his foot anywhere. He'd give me that foot back.
It's unbelievable. And by the way, this happened to, I would say, every person in one way or the other in their interactions with him. And the pattern. There you were in your pattern. I mean, you were going in and out of your pattern of Dale, RamDev, Stanford degree, and the whole thing, and then let that go. Isn't that a beautiful metaphor for the reality of what we're living through right now? It's that polarization, right?
Right.
We just flop from one part of our being to another.
Well, another thing that Maharaj-ji said was, it's better to trust in God than to try to figure everything out.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, and he also said, it's a mistake to teach by individual karmic differences. Like you say this thing to that person, this thing to that person. You just say, love people, it's all one, love God. And all these complicated patterns that I've seen. I mean, it's my way of making a buck. And it does help people, but that's not the deepest level of teaching. And in fact, there is this thing that I talk about, spiritual healing. And when I was younger, and all these yogis and lamas and roshis and swamis and stuff were coming to the Bay Area, I would have a test question that I would ask them to see how much I approved of them, right? And the test question was, if I have a friend who's dying and they've never meditated and they're really afraid, what's the best thing I can do for them? And the good ones almost all said roughly, merge your mind with the one mind, and then merge your mind with the mind of your friend. So that you're not seeing them as a cancer patient or a dying person, or that you're there to fix them. You're not reifying death or separation. But what you're dealing with is the illusion of separateness. That you go into beyond separateness, and then you, in some fundamental way, join with them. And to the extent that their karma allows them to rest there, then healing is happening. But you're not doing it. Like that great story about Ramana Maharshi, who was such a wonderful healer. A stranger came to him and said, I'm sick, and so many people said you're a great healer. Can you heal me? And Ramana Maharshi said, no, you must have the wrong guy. It's not me. I'm not a healer. And the guy said, no. I mean, everybody, so many people have told me, come to you. And Ramana saying, I don't know what you're talking about. And finally, one of his devotees is there, overheard this whole thing. And he said, Ramana, what he's saying is healing happens through you. And Ramana said, oh, of course, healing happens through me. But he was so confused when somebody actually accused him of being the healer that he didn't know what the guy was talking about. So to go beyond, I know the patterns, or I'm the devotee, or I'm here to help the dying people, or whatever the thing is. Yeah, I get lost in that. And in fact, we've got to do that sometimes. We've got to meet people where they are. But can I meet them there, but be in this wide open place at the same time?
Yeah. That's the key. Go a little further into spiritual healing.
Yeah. So
what are you speaking to?
What am I speaking
to? I mean, I know it's pretty transparent, but a little bit in terms of the complexities of how you're working with people regarding healing on that level.
So like in Tibetan Buddhism, they say if somebody's a relatively advanced practitioner and they get sick, they encourage them to just do Dzogchen, to just do non-dual practice. That's the deepest healing practice, not to imagine the white light coming in and purifying you and getting rid of the toxicity. And that's all duality. That's kind of reifying the fact that there's a me here with a body here that's sick. And that certainly is one level, but the deepest level is just going into that place. So one of the things that makes me happiest of anything I do in the world, I usually do when I'm lying in bed at night trying to go to sleep, is I say the mantra that Maharaj-ji gave me. I say it one time, and then I think of my son. And then I think of a guy I know who's a friend of a friend who's dying of esophageal cancer. And then I say the mantra again. And then I say somebody in my group whose brother is having the hardest time you could imagine. And then, so I just, one moment of the mantra, the next moment of somebody who's suffering. It's just do that. It's way better than counting sheep, right? And it's just this thing of going into wholeness and being with suffering. And at the end of that, I just feel like just wide open and so moist. It's hard to describe it. So that there are these more dualistic practices like, I'm going to do Tonglen for you or for people with cancer or something like that. And that's a useful practice. But compassion can be spelled with a small c or with a capital C, right? Depending. That our true nature is compassion. And in fact, in Buddhism, they say when the mind is totally awakened, naturally arising compassion activity occurs. You don't have to try to be compassion. You are compassion, right? Mm-hmm. Compassion is not even an emotion. It's a state of openness of the heart in relationship to suffering.
You know what's great? I'm just thinking. I love this. This practice is that you were just describing that you do with your mantra before you go to sleep, and really, you're offering yourself compassion. So there's self-compassion by virtue of repeating a mantra, and it's settling you deeper into your deeper presence.
Yeah.
And then you're thinking about another individual, either, I mean, in terms of your son, it's a love comes in that moment, and then back to the mantra, and where you're settling even deeper, and then somebody who needs help or who is very sick or whatever the issue may be, you're reaching out in that moment.
Right.
So it's really good, RamDev. I really love that. I've been doing, I also do a similar thing with the mala at night, with mantra, and it's a way to really combine like loving kindness practice with self-compassion. So this is a great thing, everybody. I think really notable for when many people ask me, and I'm sure ask you, RamDev, what do? I now see that there's something to do to get free or to be of some use as a human in this world. And my immediate thing is to get a handle on the monkey mind, and I always recommend Vipassana meditation. But and then I will talk to people about loving kindness meditation in the form of Ram Dass's loving awareness meditation, which I think is even broader in the way that it creates the kind of spaciousness that we can have a perspective on life from that's very effective. I think that what he did in the last years of his life with this particular practice and emphasizing it to the point where people like Jack Kornfield are now, let's do a loving awareness meditation. They co-opt it from Ram Dass.
Well,
appropriately. So I'm kidding.
Ram Dass didn't make this up. I mean, this has been going on for a few millennia, but that's fine.
It's codified here in the West, where we'll trademark it. We should trademark it.
I'm loving awareness. Copyright Ram Dass.
Yeah,
there you go.
But anyhow, all to say is that is a very important thing to me, where you are giving to yourself as well as others. And doing it in the same moment as a practice is, I think, very effective.
I would guess that a lot of people know about Tonglen, where taking and sending, where you're breathing in the suffering of someone else and breathing out the antidote with loving kindness. Compassion, breathing in, loving kindness, breathing out. And usually we do the opposite. We breathe in the good stuff and breathe out the bad stuff. But in the opening to the suffering of other people, as Raghu was suggesting here, it really cuts through at the very root the place that causes suffering, of self-cherishing. And by, in a way, putting other people first and not saying, oh, woe is me, I've got my suffering, this and that, it really stabilizes the mind. It stabilizes the monkey mind. The monkey mind is there because we don't know who we are, right? And that aggression that is at the root of all distraction is really fear of death. Everybody's afraid of death. Fear of death is lack of enlightenment. any place where you're lost in your separateness, you're going to be afraid of dying, and that's where you're not enlightened. So that horrible, wonderful quote of Ram Dass, "Suffering is grace," that I always knew was true, and I always hated it from the depth of my being. It's like,
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because it means you have to lean into your suffering. You have to embrace it rather than run away and get stoned or have a drink or get another bad relationship or whatever I was addicted to in that particular decade. That's right. So I'm very stubborn, but I'm finally getting there at this advanced age.
Yes. Isn't that funny too? You get a little closer and you go, gee, that would have been useful about 3 decades ago. And that little realization. I wanted to say something about reification.
Okay.
And I'd like you to give us the dictionary meaning of reification.
Well, I'm a little bit stumped here. So I've never really heard the term like that. Are you talking about...
You just used it, reification? Reify.
Yeah, reify the self, you mean, or what?
Well, to me, it means that, and this, where did I really came across it being used in this way by Tsoknyi Rinpoche, did a thing with our buddy Danny Goleman, wonderful book on meditation.
Right.
And he talked about the way in which we have thoughts and our story, and we project them out everywhere to ourselves and everyone else, and we reify, blah, blah.
Okay. So you were just a few minutes ago talking about Vipassana meditation. And in Vipassana, we train to be much more clearly with the object of awareness, the object of mindfulness. I'm mindful of my breath. I'm mindful of my thoughts. And as practice deepens into a Mahayana practice where we're bringing in compassion, we're not just practicing to awaken, but we're really practicing for others.
Yeah.
We're getting more interested in our relationship with the content rather than just what is the content. Okay. And then we get into Tantra. So let's even go back. In the Mahayana stage, as the heart becomes more and more open, the heart is by nature boundless. It's spacious heart. When I heard Kalu Rinpoche say the heart is empty, it's like, what is he talking about? But finally, I'm getting what emptiness is. It's not that there's nothing there, but it's empty of grasping, essentially, empty of self. So you still have an eye fixation, but it's not right in your face. It's just one point in the vast sky of heart mind, right? So now Tantra is beginning to open up because you're not fixated on yourself. You're opening to the suffering of other people in the way we've just been talking about. And it's revealed those things that Maharaj-ji said, that he was primarily a tantric teacher in a lot of ways. He would say the best form to worship God is every form. It's all the Divine Mother. That's exactly what Tantra is about. It's all the Mother. It's all sacred energy. It's all awakened energy. Okay, so now we've gone from, we're no longer reifying objects so much. We're able to be with them, and then we're having a loving, compassionate relationship with them. And now finally, we're getting to the point where what is the nature of experience? It's rigpa, it's wholeness, if you will. So that we're going from letting go of reifying the object to letting go of reifying the subject. So the seer seeing the seen, all that's left is seeing. There's nobody doing it, and there's nothing out there to be seen. And in fact, 3 guys just got the Nobel Prize in Physics for quantum entanglement, where they mathematically proved what ancient Hindu and Buddhist tantric wisdom is saying for hundreds and thousands of years, that the Western worldview is backwards, that there's a solid reality out there that we can reify, and that we are perceiving devices, so that when I hold up my teacup, everybody sees the same thing. But if you were a bat or a dog, you'd be perceiving something completely different from what I'm seeing. So that at one level, the cup is not the cup in the solid way. And it's the other way around. There's one consciousness flowing through us, creating reality, rather than we're perceiving reality. So when Maharaj-ji says we're all one, that's what he's talking about. There's one consciousness, sabek, universe, one song is happening. And you and I aren't connected. We're one. It's not like, I mean, yeah, we're brothers and you're in Ojai and I'm not in Ojai. And, you know, you've got a little more hair than I do, but I've got a little more whatever. That's, you know, it's like all those differences are real. But there's this other more fundamental level. Well, it's all pure consciousness. It's all Rigpa. It's all the beloved. The beloved can only be everything, right? And I remember once when we were at Kenshi and I don't know, people were talking and Dada overheard us say something. And he came up and he said, you Westerners, you don't really understand. You think that God is only the good stuff. God is everything. God is the difficult stuff too, right? And once again, that's Tantra. So like right behind me, there's Hanuman up there and there's Shiva over there, right? And you've got, I guess that's Shakyamuni Buddha there, but there are depictions of the deity that are wrathful and consuming. They're consuming the illusion of separateness. And Hanuman is very tricky because at one level, he's this cuddly monkey.
You got one right behind you.
I know. It's the one where he's pulling his chest open.
Yeah.
Right. And there's Durga, who's also one of Maharajji's favorites in the sense that there was often a Durga statue in his temples.
Yeah.
That's the Kenshi Durga up there, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I see.
So.
Okay, wait, go back to the two guys that just won, did you say a Nobel? Three guys. Okay, what did they exactly prove out that the ancients have known forever?
That it's all one.
Really?
They mathematically prove sabek, quantum entanglement. So
what is that?
So just as an example, there's something called the double slit experiment. You know about that?
No.
Probably some people don't. So light can be a wave or a particle. It can be actually stuff of particles, or it can just be a wave of pure energy, which is not a thing, if you will. And so imagine that you've got a device that's generating light and it's going through these two slits in a piece of cardboard or something metal.
Yeah.
And then there's a screen behind that is capturing what comes through the two slits. If somebody's watching the experiment, light goes through as particles and there's two slits of light behind it. But if nobody's watching the experiment, light is only energy. It's going through as waves and there's an interference pattern on the screen behind it. So that without consciousness, there is no form. The Buddha said, if you hear the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness and emptiness is form, and you're not terrified or startled, you don't understand it.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of my paraphrase, but he said, you should be terrified or startled if you really get the Heart Sutra. That it's not solid the way we think it is, right? It's not. It's all consciousness. How could Maharaj-ji do those things that he did? How could he know the past and the future? How could he? One of my favorite stories about him is that story where he was being shaved.
Yeah, I just said two places at once. Yeah, tell that story. Do you know that?
Okay,
story?
Back in the
this is fun stuff, everybody. Yeah.
Maharaj-ji was younger, and he decided he needed a shave, so he came into this village. He went to the barber, and the barber doesn't have a shop with a pole with twirling stripes on it. It's some guy on the side of the road with a little cloth and a kerosene heater heating up some water. So Maharaj-ji squats down in the guy's barber shop and he says, give me a shave. So the guy lathers him up and he starts shaving him. And he's telling him how upset he is. He's an old man, that he's lost track of his son, that somehow through miscommunication, he went one place and the son went the other place. In India, not a lot of internet or whatever, but they lost each other. And in India, there's no social security. Your social security is your kids, right? So here's this old guy, and he can't find his son. He doesn't know where his son is. His son doesn't know where he is. And he's saying how despondent he is. And he's about half done being shaved, and Maharaj says, I've got to pee. Give me a minute. He runs behind a building. And he comes back a few minutes later, and the guy completes the shave. End of that part of the story. The next day, the guy's son shows up. And the man is overjoyed. And he said, well, how did you know where to find me? He said, well, I was living in a village a few hundred miles away. And yesterday afternoon, this guy came running into my shop, and he was half shaven. He had shaving cream on half of his face, and said, your father really needs you. Your father needs you. You must go to such and such a place. Right? So how does he do that? He does that because he's living at that level where it's all one, where it's not, there's this place and there's that place and they're 200 miles away. Or the story that RamDev tells about spleen, right? Where the night before he met Maharaj-ji, and he's thinking about his mother, and she died of spleen cancer. And he didn't tell anybody. He's looking up at the stars thinking about his mother, and he meets Maharaj-ji, and Maharaj-ji says, give me the Land Rover. And RamDev freaks out. And then Maharaj-ji says, last night you were out under the stars. Yeah, I was. And you were thinking about your mother. And RamDev is kind of like, oh, I didn't tell anybody that. And then in English, Maharaj-ji said spleen. And RamDas's mind exploded. How could he do that? It's not a trick, it's like, it's all available because it's all one if you're surrendered into all one.
Now, just proven by these three gentlemen, if they were three gentlemen.
I'm not sure they're all gentlemen just because they got a Nobel Prize, but yeah.
No, but I mean, there might be, I'm trying to say, it could be not just a man, could be a woman, that's all.
Okay. You want to hear about another experiment?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
This is incredible news. The sub-ec is proven. I mean, come on.
Okay, well, here's another one that there's a slight buildup to it. So the scientists developed a machine that essentially would flip a coin like 100,000 times. It wasn't a coin flipping, but a subatomic particle would randomly decay to particle A or particle B 50% of the time, A or B, right? So it's like flipping a coin. And they got some people who supposedly had paranormal abilities. And they said, okay, we're running this experiment. We're flipping the coin 100,000 times, maybe 1,000,000 times, a very large number of times. Can you visualize that it's going to come up heads? And there were people who could do this in a way that was highly statistically significant, that the fact that it was happening by luck was one out of many, many millions. Okay. It's kind of interesting, not super interesting. Then they say, okay, tomorrow we're going to run that thing. Can you today visualize that tomorrow it's going to come up heads? Once again, some people could do this in a way that's highly statistically significant. But the interesting part, here's the one. They said, yesterday we ran the experiment. Can you today visualize that yesterday it came up heads? And what do you think happened?
Heads.
Not so easy. If anybody had looked at the results, if the results went into human consciousness, no effect at all. But if the results were only in a computer hard drive, that nobody had seen the results, then visualizing today affected yesterday.
Really? Holy shit. Really?
So think about this. So suppose you've got a pain in your belly and you're afraid you have cancer of the pancreas. And you go to the doctor and you say, I've got this pain here. And the doctor says, well, let's do an MRI. Let's take a look at that, right? And they do an MRI. until the radiologist looks at that picture and says, that guy's got cancer, you don't have cancer, you just got a pain in your belly. That's the time to do the visualizing. That's the time. It's not in human consciousness yet. It's not a thing in the way that because it's unknown, right? Maharaj-ji could rest in the unknown. Krishnamurti wrote a book entitled Freedom from the Known. What a fantastic title. The Bible talks about the peace that passes understanding. I've got a PhD in understanding. It's like, so I've got a BS, bullshit. I've got an MS, more shit, PhD piled higher and deeper. That's all it is.
Oh, God. Wow. That is, I mean, the way, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, of course, has been working with scientists and Richie Davidson and so on, neuro people, to show the reality of what they have already proven out over the ages in terms of the reality and the true nature of who we are. So it's fantastic, really fantastic. So go ahead. What were you saying?
So I work with dying people, and in my workshops, I tell people, here's what's going to happen after you die. And they say, well, how do you know? You don't look like you're any more a product of the after-death state than I am. And I say, well, I've taken really a lot of psychedelics. I've been around a lot of dying people. I've gone very deeply into meditation. But basically, I've been around these Tibetan guys and women, mostly guys, and some other great saints who say, here's what's happened. Here's what happens. People that know. And if you cut away the differences that have to do with religion and culture, they're saying the same thing, that consciousness survives death in some way. The Buddha did say that trying to understand karma and reincarnation are two of the four things that can unhinge the mind.
Oh, speaking about consciousness, and I had done a podcast recently with a woman, a very substantial woman who's a psychic, who had extraordinary near-death experiences. I mean, extraordinary. And so it led me to, so I was kind of fishing around. Ram Dass and I used to talk about it a lot. He was very, obviously, in the years before he left, he used to read a lot of books around ND and even Alexandra. I don't know if you know who that is.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Yeah. So anyhow, in the course of it, I came upon an article which talked about consciousness and how there's a pushback to these NDEs from medical people that consciousness dies. But wait a minute now, this person died and came back and just recounted these extraordinary experiences, which are common to people who have near-death experiences. So consciousness is not resting in a body. Consciousness is beyond a body. It was really phenomenal. But what's really phenomenal is that this is all getting proven out.
Right.
That's extraordinary.
So that the Western worldview is that the brain creates the mind, where it's the other way around, that the mind creates the brain.
Yeah. Okay, I got to say something. I mean, we know all this. You and I have been doing this stuff for ages, and I'm going to take myself here as an example and not include you because you may not be part of what I'm about to say, which is around polarization. And when I speak about Maharaj-ji to people, I speak about, okay, this being no longer polarization. There was no me and you. There was no us and them, within himself, without, et cetera, et cetera. I use polarization as an example. So here we are, and here I am after all of this, and I am still very reactive to the force of negativity, let's just put it that way, that is divided this country into two parts in here.
Right.
And when it appears in front of me, which is the other, I'm immediately reacting to the other. And he's, by the way, a great Ravana. I'm speaking to our potential, one of the presidential candidates. And so I am astounded, RamDev, by this polarization, this reactivity to this negative projection, and I know all of us at some point or another are. And my question is and I won't include you, but one, essentially compassionate human, I consider myself, can still be reactive in this polarized manner is astounding.
So is there a question there that you're still reactive?
The question is, how do we bridge this polarization that is going on in our sphere of life?
Well, a few things come to my mind. One is, first of all, when you die, Donald Trump is going to be at your bedside smiling. And to the extent that you're reactive, it's going to make it harder to die. Obviously, physically, he's not going to be there, but that unconscious reactivity is going to be gumming up the works a little bit. There's a wonderful story about Maharaj-ji where we were on Kenchi one day and the president of India came. You were probably there that day, I don't remember. But anyway, the president of India, he's not the prime minister, he's not the big deal, but he's kind of a big deal. He's the president. He's a devotee. And he had like 2 or 3 or 4 cars full of psychophants, and they're bringing baskets of sweets and blankets and fruit and everything. They're making a really big deal about it, right? And then they're leaving. They're driving up the side of the Kenchi Valley there. And Maharaj-ji turns to somebody and says, all that fuss, and he's just a worldly king. So, and, think of what Gandhi did. Think of what Martin Luther King did. Think of what Nelson Mandela did in very harsh conditions. And maybe it's going to be my son. Maybe it's going to be your son. Maybe it's going to be, this younger generation, there's some really incredibly beautiful people. And it just takes one being to change the course of history. And yes, it's a very divisive time. And at the same time, all those Maharaj-ji stories are true. And is your faith stronger than your reactivity to ignorance? There's always going to be ignorance in the world. There's always going to be aggressive, needy, crazy, grasping people running around. And to the extent that you and I and other people can stay centered and balanced. What I was saying in the very beginning about being grounded and centered, of having an embodied mindfulness, that the lower chakras are like creating this mountain-like energetic structure so that then the heart can be vulnerable and spacious and be open to even the political divisiveness, to be open to the craziest right-wing religious nut Republican person or the craziest left-wing person. There's people on all sides of the equation here, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm thinking a lot about what's going on the college campuses right now.
Yeah.
And how different it is from when we were I was demonstrating against the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And how what's happening to some of the Jewish students. I don't know. We don't have to get too political here, but compassion allows the mind to be stable and allows for compassionate activity. And let me tell you a story about a friend of mine. I don't know how much time we have. A little bit.
Got time for a story. Go ahead.
Anyway, this guy I know, I helped him help both of his parents die. And his father was a Nazi. His father was actually a guard in a Croatian camp. And they had come to America And there was some other things that happened that his father allowed harm to come to his son because they needed money, right? So the son loved the father, but it was a pretty complicated relationship. So the father dies, and a couple of years later, my friend calls me up and said, I've been trying to do compassion practice. I've been trying to do Tonglen for my father all weekend. And I just can't open my heart to my father because of these things that happened. I want to find closure. I can't do it. And I'm so frustrated. I thought, why don't I call Dale? And I said, what you need to do is have compassion for the part of you that can't have compassion for your father. And he started crying. And what you need to do is have compassion for the part of you that doesn't have compassion for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So the Dalai Lama talks about loving your enemy, right? I mean, he knows full well what the Chinese have done to his monks and nuns, how they have been murdered, raped, and tortured. And he keeps his heart open. The Tibetans say this incredibly beautiful thing, to me at least, that compassion is a combination of sadness and joy. Mm-hmm. You're sad that they're suffering, but there is a joy that transcends happiness and sadness because your heart is open. So can you feel the sadness of the political divisiveness? And yet your vast heart is open, way larger than that, so that you can feel joyfulness even though people are suffering. People on both sides of the aisle are hurting. People on both sides of the aisle, their hearts are closed. They're blaming. They're hating.
Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's like, where do these people come from? Apparently, Georgia.
They're ordered up. Yeah, it's ordered up as part of the sub-ec, all one, for sure. I
love Marjorie Taylor Greene. Ramdas had John Ashcroft on his puja table. He had Donald Trump on his puja table.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he used to say, I am speaking to the true nature of that being, not to their unfortunate incarnation in this life.
Right.
And yes, but I think, go back, actually. I love your little practice and what it reflected. Just doing your mantra before you go to sleep, that included you, and it included others who were unfortunate or fortunate. And that mix is, I think, everybody can relate to. Mm-hmm. Absolutely everybody. And that's really part of the all one. And it's what we were shown by Maharaj-ji when we were with him. Absolutely 100%.
Right.
How about a couple of minutes, little meditation, just around this inclusivity through compassion?
Okay. Then please begin by invoking that which you trust. Your own true nature, Maharaj-ji, Hanuman, the mother, higher power. Invoking that which does not die, that which does not change. Trusting enough so that practice is not self-improvement or fixing. Trusting that what we invoke is our true nature. We can allow experience to unfold, to come to us. And bringing this trust also into your body, just bring your attention down to the lower part of your torso. First, the root, the base of the torso, the root chakra. Just let a couple of breaths drop down there. Beyond fear, underneath fear. Receiving earth element, mother, support, groundedness. And in a similar way, dropping down into the lower belly, a few inches below the navel, being centered, almost as if you could, instead of paying attention to your belly, pay attention from your belly. Can you hear the sound of my voice from centeredness? This I that thinks it's in charge, this imaginary CEO up in your head, surrendering down into the belly, dropping down. Antidote to guilt and shame. Lower body feeling stable like a mountain, regardless of content. Centered. Thoughts, emotions, perceptions, sensations, rising, passing away. A very brief foundation then for opening the heart, breathing into the heart, breathing out into spaciousness, breathing into the heart, love, compassion, devotion, spacious, connected heart, connected to self, connected to each other, connected to God, connected to the earth. And with each out breath, surrendering into spaciousness in all directions, above and below, to the right and left, before and behind. And in this spaciousness, there is all of the human condition, all of the suffering. The heart breaks. There's so much suffering. And yet, the heart is vast enough to include all of it, joyfully. Without doing anything, trusting who we are. Compassion for all is our nature. Naturally arising a wish that all beings might be free from suffering and from the causes of suffering, including yourself. May all beings be free.
Ram Ram.
Ram
Ram
Ram.
Ram Ram Ram. I love trusting who we are. That's a great practice. Great. Thank you so much, RamDev. Dale.
Always my pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. By the way, I mean, going back, I'm recalling, because we were telling stories, or mostly RamDev, about Maharaj-ji, and quotes from him. That book, Love Everyone, which was edited and written by Raghu Markus, that has this beautiful insert. This just made me think, because what happened back then is we all wrote in our diaries what had happened that day, what he might have said to anyone or in general. And they are very accurate. In my mind, more accurate aside from than Miracle of Love, which came through many different minds and, was filtered. This is unfiltered.
A wonderful book.
Yeah. And you can get that. You can go to ramdas.org and to the shop and get a copy. And we keep...
Let me just once again say...
Yes.
livingdying.org. I've got workshops coming up. I'm going to be with Jai and his wife Nubia, Jai Uttal, at the Hanuman Temple first weekend in June. We're going to be talking about Hanuman's heart, devotion, and service. I've got a free Saturday Zoom group that has 1,000 people in it every other Saturday. And from those talks come a lot of the podcasts on the Be Here Now network.
Yes. What's the name of the podcast on the Be Here Now network?
I think it's called Healing at the Edge.
Healing at the Edge, yeah.
It's under RamDev. You just look up RamDev, it's there.
Right. It's marvelous. By the way, it's June 7th through 9th in Taos, New Mexico at the nkbashram.org. Go there if you want to join. I think there are still some spots left. It'll be marvelous with Jai and RamDev. And it is, as I was telling RamDev earlier, it is co-presented by Love Serve Remember Foundation.
And Raghu was coming as their representative.
And I'm going to represent them. It's a little bit
of
a way for me
to get a free flight to Taos, apparently.
Hey, inside stuff. Well, no, I'm going to sit with you, and I'll be there, and I'm going to prompt you about some of the themes that we just investigated in this podcast, okay, around compassion and self-compassion and compassion for others, which is all way before thinking you're going to do any seva, in my mind.
Right.
So again, thank you so much, RamDev. And everybody, this is Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and take advantage of all the wonderful teachers and presenters, including RamDev, that are on the network. And by the way, RamDev, Krishnamurti is coming to the network. Took a couple of years, but he's coming. And what was the book? Something about the known. What?
Freedom from the known.
I think that's what the name of this podcast is going to be. Freedom from the known. Isn't that something?
Yeah, well, there it is. What a great title.
Yeah, really. All right, guys, we'll see you next week.
Take it easy.
Bye-bye.